Okay,
Super.
and you can hear me clearly now.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, right. Okay, so let's start. So let's go on to the next slide. So first of all, for those of you who are early career or even mid-career or even late career, I just wanted to pick up the ERC fellowships. Next slide. So we've had some success. I think Lena is on board on the webinar today, and many congratulations to her winning a consolidated grant. Overall, our community is still not putting in as many bids as our colleagues in the astronomy community, particularly in the exoplanet community. So I really would like to see people think about applying for these to build a bit of a critical mass. There are different types of grants. We now have experience in people who have won all of these types of awards. So if yourself or colleagues have wish to put one of these together, we do have experienced people who perhaps can help you in telling you some good tips of how to go forward. Can we just start? There are some different rules which have just come in this year, the 23-24. So I'll point those out because they are quite important. You get the next slide. So the starting grants are 2 to 7 years of experience since completion of PhD. They're 1.5 million up to 5 years. But please note that you can get an additional million if you cover the eligible startup costs. For example, if you're getting somebody coming from a third country to the EU or an associated country, or the purchase of major equipment. Associated countries do include the UK, so UK people going to Europe can make use of this. The coverage of the grants is very generous because it's 100% of the eligible costs and the 25% of the cost towards the indirect cost that will goes to your institution. As I said, it would be really nice to see some of our younger, we have a bit of EPIC members here, putting themselves forward for these awards. Not least because once you get one of these awards, it enables you to leave other sums of money and funding. And indeed, for many of you, it might get you your permanent position. So it would be good to see next year, people starting now thinking about people with this kind of age bracket, thinking about putting forward proposals. Don't leave it to the last minute, please. Spend time, and you can also use the mentoring scheme, which Manita might say something about at the end. Again, if you don't know about it, the EPIC mentoring scheme, where you can tie up with somebody who may have had one of these or some other senior person to help you put this together. Next award. Next slide. The consolidated grants, I say, we have somebody who's just won one of these recently. They're 2 million over 5 years. Again, you've got this €1 million euros extra, and again, the costs are the same. And again, it would be good to see people in this bracket put themselves forward for these awards. Again, if we look at the number that are awarded, you can find a full list of these on the ERC site. You will see that within the areas, and I'll come to the areas that I think we cover, Europlanet, we aren't actually terribly well represented. So again, I really would like people to think about these. And the next one, for us golden oldies, or the people more than 12 years of experience, normally people are professors. You really have to have a good track record in the last 10 years, a good publication record in the last 10 years, and they're 2.5 million. And again, we want to do these in the community. But again, it would be good to see people applying for these. Next. And there is also the opportunity for consortia to work together in these large-scale synergy grants. Gareth Davies in our community was the one who had one of these grants. It's 4 principal investigators working together. One will be the PI. All of them must have a good, strong track record, so be of advanced ERC type standard. You can see the sums of money are large, 10 million for 6 years, plus up to 4 million for startup costs, or particularly for purchase of equipment. Again, I think it would be nice to see the community, the Europlanet community. I'm sure there are really good areas here where people could work together to make a good application for these. And it'll be very nice to see some more in our community. Next slide. So there have been some changes in the last year. In its December meeting last year for the 23-24, they really want to now focus much more on the current CV and track record. The applicants will be asked to explain any career breaks, etc. So as well. But the effect is really the profiles of the principal investigators. This paperwork, you used to have a lot of stuff there, don't need to be that anymore. The real aim now is to weigh the project proposal more than the past achievements in the applicant. So although you need to get over the threshold, if you've got a really good idea and you've got the threshold score of having read a pretty good number of papers in the last few years, they really are looking at the science and the project, which we really should be able to come up with some good things. You've still got a work program for 24. Next slide. And there are now an additional panel in social sciences humanities that doesn't really affect. There has been some restructuring in the evaluation panels. There are more people on the evaluation panels now than there were before. So given a wider range of expertise, because in the past, sometimes the criticism was that there really wasn't an expert in the field, that we had. Just for the benefit of you, the Commission is moving to a new funding scheme called lump funding. It's a new way of funding the proposals, and perhaps it's a little complicated. But again, we have Susmita from Europlanet, who's been on courses to try and understand that and can give guidance on that. Perhaps if you're from an institute that's not quite so sure how that's going to work. Next slide. Okay, so the ERC and the Marie Curie, these are all topics that are listed in panels. So most of the work that we do comes under the physics panel. And I want to stress that because you will see here, astrobiology and astrochemistry in the Marie Curie calls are under the physics P4 panel, as are exoplanets, as are the formations of stars and planets, as are solar physics and space weather. So most of the topics that we cover in Europlanet, as far as Marie Curie proposals are concerned, fall under the physics panel. And that's an important thing to know, even if you think you're a geologist or you're a chemist, it is lapped under the physics panel. Actually, quite pleased on this one. I think I said this last year. We've argued some time to get astrobiology as a theme onto this because it's a rapidly growing community, and a lot of the work we do has astrobiology interest. And I'm very pleased to be able to get them to accept that they put astrobiology as now a topic. And as I say, notice it's under physics. Next slide. So I want to push the Marie Curie fellowships. The call just finished in September. The next call will be next year. You're allowed up to 8 years experience in this. You must have, however, either got your doctoral degree, and that means you must have defended your thesis. So, for example, one of my students got his PhD in this year, in March. So he's only eligible to put the bid in then, not last year, even though he was completed his thesis, was waiting to defend his thesis. So you have to look at that deadline. Now there are two types of these fellowships, and they can last between 12 and 24 months, or 24 and 36 months. Although I hardly know anybody who doesn't ask for the full amount. 24 months are the European postdoctoral fellowships, and that means you have to be hosted by a research organization in either an associate country, which now does mean the UK again, just hint that one, or member state. And they're very generous in terms of their salaries and so on. But there are also global postdoctoral fellowships where you have an outgoing phase in a third country. The third country is any country that's not a member state or an associate state country. So, for example, one of my former students, postdocs, is now applied to Canada and America. The outgoing phase lasts between 12 and 24 months, and then you must have a 12-month return phase. So if you do this, you must have a host that's going to welcome you back. And I think Sergio Opolo is on this call, and he did exactly one of those. He did 2 years in the States, came back to Europe, and has been very successful since. So the next call seems a long time away, but actually you've got quite a lot of work to do, particularly if you're doing the global postdoctoral fellowship. You've got to find a host aboard, talk to them, come up with a good plan. And again, I recommend the mentoring scheme, which we put on in Europlanet. We have a lot of people who have held these fellowships. There is an MSc, a club. We've got a lot of people in the community who have held these. So a lot of people have got experience who can guide you in writing of them. So if you've got any young people, if you're a more senior person, you want to get somebody to do that, please contact us and we can put that young person in contact with somebody who's been successful. Okay, next slide. I just want to point out also that there is special additional funding if you hold the fellowship in an underrepresented state. So that means the countries predominantly in Central and Eastern Europe, Southeast Europe, and includes Portugal. So if you choose a laboratory or a lab hosted in those countries, your grant will go through the normal Marie Curie system, but there is a special funding scheme, which means that those projects that are near the cutoff can then be funded. And we have some excellent facilities in Central and Eastern European states. I will push Atomki, for example, in experimental astrochemistry, in Hungary, in Dutch, but there are many centers in the Czech Republic and Poland, members of Europlanet, and you can apply to those laboratories or those centers, and perhaps you'll be a bigger fish in a smaller pond rather than go to some of the big laboratories where you might be a small fish in a big pond. But you also have the opportunity that if your proposal is close to the cutoff, you have another funding round, and they really want to push people to do that. And I think career-wise, it may be very good. So when you're thinking about there, or if you're in one of those countries, try and encourage people to apply, because I think this is a really good time to try and get those people into our community there. Next slide. Okay, so next I'm going to turn now, the rest of the things I'm now going to turn now to the Horizon Europe calls, the calls which the Europlanet Research Infrastructure 2024, it was funded under. There's a very active discussion going on at the moment about these calls, and there will be another set of calls in 25-27. That's probably the subject of a completely different webinar. But there are some calls open, and I want to just give you a brief guide to where they are and some very tentative ideas of what we're thinking about. And people who might want to engage with us, with the community, and maybe even come up with ideas of calls that of suggestions that we might have. So if we go to the next slide. So the calls are, one of the calls is, we are Europlanet, the research infrastructure. But as those of you who are in Erin will know, we try to work together with other research infrastructures in the space sector, particularly the telescopes, the radio and the optical telescopes, the nuclear astrophysics, KTEC, and some others like Eurolabs. And we have to do this. The idea is that we have to work together. The opportunity is for us to do something what they call consolidation of the research infrastructure landscape and looking at the long-term sustainability of the research infrastructures. It's 3 to 4 million. There are some rules about at least one of the partners needs to be a ERIC or an ESV landmark, but we do have those available, particularly in the telescope community. So we are thinking about probably responding to this reply. Some of you will know that we put in a bid earlier this year called the Space Eye proposal, which attempted to bring people together. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, but this is something we want to follow up. So we are looking for people who perhaps would be interested in working with us and trying to put a bid together on this design. I think we decided, I think there's a policy, there's a general view that we should apply. So we're looking at this in the space sector as a whole, and we are having ongoing discussions. It is very much along the policy and political parts of developing it, but it is very important if we're going to keep places like Europlanet community going. And as Anita said, although we have plans for keeping the research infrastructure going regardless of European funding. So we are working around this area, and any of you are interested in sort of helping out with this one, I think this would be quite valuable. Next slide. There is also a call for development and concept of new research infrastructures. As they say here, these are, they can be upgrades of the current facilities, but really they're looking at the development of new concepts for research infrastructures, either single site or multi-site, distributed like Europlanet 2024 is, or even virtual, particularly if they're data related. And the idea is that all fields of research can be considered. And although I have not heard too much more recently in detail, I know in the summer there were some discussion that with the ESA concentrating now on the return to the moon, the idea of having a research infrastructure, distributed research infrastructure, linking together laboratories and so on with the interest on settlement and scientific exploration and exploitation of the moon. I hope to have some more details of that in the next couple of weeks. As I need to say, we've been very busy over the last time. And we'll see if other people, if that community is going to push ahead with that. And if we are, we'll probably coordinate, we'll aim for the Europlanet community to see if there are people in the Europlanet community who would be interested in participating in that in some way or another. Next slide. As you are aware, within Europlanet, we have a global strategy and several of our field sites are out in Africa. There is a call out for collaborating with research infrastructures with Africa. There have been some initial discussions. Again, these need to be firmed up really before Christmas in looking at infrastructures in Africa. The space community has very strong infrastructures in Africa with the SKA and the MERCAT and so on. As you can see here, the strategy is to link not just really on the science, but also develop the capacities of the people in Africa. We have learned that this can be led either by a European host or an African host. It's either. And I think this is one that we might like to see. Next. This call is a particularly interesting one. It's for developing the next generation of scientific instrumentation. It's quite large sums of money, 5 to 10 million. Again, there are some rules about 3 different research infrastructures. We have been interestingly contacted in the last week by infrastructures like the CERIC, that's the Central European Research Infrastructure, which is saying, okay, we would like to maybe develop some new instrumentation in this, particularly interested in maybe an accelerator physics. Doesn't have to just be space, it can be linking across the capacities. That Central European infrastructure is actually an ERIC. So these things can be broad-based. They can be thematically based within a space context, or they can be, say, something like developing accelerator facilities, etc., for Europe, or synchrotron facilities for Europe. As you can see here, there's a set of rules there on doing it, but I think, again, this is something I'll be very interested to know if people are involved or their institutions are involved in anything, particularly in that area. Next slide. So they're the research infrastructure things. So let's say Europlanet is looking at all of those in its sustainability plan and everything else. And we will update people with as things develop. As I say, we only had the briefing. There was a briefing by the Commission, which wasn't terribly informative a couple of weeks ago. We are likely to have a meeting with the Commission. They've offered us a meeting before Christmas. So we'll get a better idea. May have put some ideas forward for these calls, and then we'll see how the Commission responds, sees whether it feels that what we're putting forward meets their ideas or not. So ideas and recommend and suggestions, and any news that you have on people planning for these calls would be very interesting. And as I say, between now and Christmas, we will have that meeting with the Commission, and then we will have to, whoever's going to lead these things will have to be working pretty hard to get ready for the March deadlines. The other part of Horizon Europe in space, I should mention, is Cluster 4, the space domain. These really aren't entirely relevant to people in the pure planetary science community. They are, however, linked to the Copernicus program, Copernicus for studying land and water security, and there's a big initiative that has been for some time on quantum technologies in space. There, but go to the next slide. And there are some technologies which they have highlighted for the next round. The deadline is February. And these are the areas of space research that they would like to see acted on. and for bids between 2 and 3 million. Now, again, if you look at these here, maybe none of these are particularly jumping out at you as being for planetary science, except perhaps the last one, photonics components. But it is always worthwhile keeping an eye on these calls. You will see enhanced performance in space-qualified detectors in the visible range. I guess that can also brings you into the area of cameras, etc. But again, this is a call which comes out every time they change the different types of data, or different types of topics, but it's worth keeping an eye on. Next slide. So that's where we are on the Horizon Europe programs. Not as many as we've had in previous years that have been targeted towards the planetary science community or the space science community, academic community. We are looking at the 25-27 calls, and we're hoping to what we are feeding into the discussions of that. And there is generally a program overall suggesting that that the next Horizon program needs to be a little bit. It needs to have some more basic science, fundamental underpinning science in it, because maybe the current program has been pushing more and more towards industry. Which is a good thing, but the quality of the bids that they're getting perhaps isn't as high as they might wish, and indeed the response isn't as high as they wish because it's very bureaucratic for companies to take part. However, we should just point out some other calls that are going on at the moment. I guess many of you have worked with or are working with ESA and the General Technology Support Program. If you go to the next slide. I just want to remind people that ESA innovation. Now, all of you are in countries, most of you are ESA membership countries. There is something called geo return. That means the money the country puts in is meant to come back. And this was a topic at the UK Space Conference, which Anita alluded to, we attended last week. Many countries, many of the smaller countries, and I'm going to again say Central Eastern Europe countries, the countries that joined, are not getting as much geo return as they want, i.e. they're not getting back all the money that they're putting in. And this is mainly because the quality of the bids. These bids are written in a particular way. But we do have people who have got a lot of experience in doing this, including the Society Treasurer Didier, who worked with ESA for a while. So he's very familiar with these. And I want to point out that although these are topics, and there is the General Support Technology Program, that is development of instrumentation and so on for space. The Discovery Program, which sounds what it says, is very much linked to the space program. And the Human and Robotic Exploration Program, which is linked to everything lunar and Lunar Gateway and the ISS. So there are opportunities for the community here, and obviously Europlanet wants to work closer and closer with the ESA Directorate. But one of the ways of doing that is for people in our community to be engaged more and more in ESA-funded programs. And again, as I said, we have some expertise in the community in helping people write those. And this suddenly came out last week at the UK Space Agency, where actually having, if you're a company or you're a new academic group, you need to work with a company. This kind of partnership which Europlanet is trying to push to get people to work with industry and encourage bids from underrepresented states would certainly be something that perhaps, again, through some of the contacts which you could have in the society, may well be valuable when you put these bids in. Next slide. And these calls come out all the time. The other area which we really should put out, and I know that actually within Europlanet, or indeed, in fact, in all the space research infrastructures, currently, KETEC, RadioNet, Opticon, Eurolabs, APEC, we haven't really considered the defence sector. Again, this was raised a lot in the UK space sector. I think it's the only time I've ever seen 6 people in uniform giving a presentation in a session. But NATO does have an approach to space, and NATO has its own funding scheme for space-based research. If we go to the next slide. So it's called Science for Peace and Security Program. It looks at emerging technologies, nanotechnology, optical technology, the development of microsatellites, metallurgy, materials in space, particularly linked to spacecraft, and unmanned aerial platforms. If we go to the next slide. It has been suggested, and I'm in favour of it, and I'm talking to a couple of some colleagues here, is that they also fund money for holding workshops. So we're writing a proposal. We will very much draft stage, but again, people who will be willing to join us in this, to bring together NATO, what they call Space Command, and the academic and industry in the space sector to discuss research needs. Some of the topics that have been suggested are the role of dust and impacts on spacecraft, particularly small spacecraft, which will constellations of spacecraft, which are obviously being used to look down, for example, in the Ukraine. The problems of space junk and how space junk can be manipulated for good or ill, and so for the protection of satellites from attack. The question of lunar bases, the questions of treaties for the moon, which will require input from planetary scientists to understand what those treaties should be. Communications, cameras, and the role of CubeSats. All of those last three, the planetary community is doing for space exploration. It may well be that expertise can be handed and be very useful for those people in the defense sector. So we shouldn't ignore this sector, because I feel this is going to be a kind of growing area, and certainly funding for this type of work is increasing. So perhaps people should think laterally about how your expertise in, for example, building cameras for looking at asteroids could be used for cameras that might spy on the ground, and communications, and just how CubeSats themselves could be used. That is an area that the NATO Space Command is certainly looking at in the building of fleet of CubeSats. So perhaps people who've got experience in that for space exploration could look at the NATO program. Next slide, please. Many of you will know the COST program. Many of you I can see on the list have participated in the COST program. Many of you know, I don't know, perhaps therefore need to tell some of you the benefit of this. The COST program is a significant program. Its aim is actually the oldest European program to bring collaboration in science and technology. It operates through what they call actions, which last up to about 4 years. In the planetary science community, the latest one of these is called the Birth of Solar Systems and Planets, and it's led by Catherine Walsh in the UK. It's to look at how planets fall and to compare the solar system planets with exoplanets, and to characterize exoplanets which we're going to see in the future space missions. This program kicked off in September of this year. It will last for 4 years. It has a series of working groups. It is open to everyone. You can join one of these working groups. Just go online, look up this number, this COST action, and you can join. If your country is not represented currently, then you can put yourself forward. You can ask your country to join. And that's good, because every country that joins, the money goes up. It will hold a series of workshops. It will hold some conferences, probably linked to other Europlanet conferences. And most importantly, perhaps best, it provides a way for people to collaborate by funding people to go to a lab or a department and perform some research for between 2 and 4 weeks is the norm. It can be a little bit longer. They don't like to have very short ones. It feels about 2 weeks. 1 week is kind of, can you do something serious in a week? But it's possible. But 1 or 2 weeks. And they're called short-term scientific missions. I guess that many of you know them, but for those who don't know them, it's a very valuable scheme. It's very simple to apply, and it provides a very nice way to develop collaborations. So, for example, you can go and do an experiment, but you could also during that time consider a bid. Maybe if you're doing a fellowship, you could visit the place that maybe then you want to apply for a fellowship through. Now, we've had a lot of these cost actions in the past, but we always need more. The next call for proposals is always in October every year. So it would be really good if in October 24, again, the community thinks of putting some bids forward. And as I say, we've been successful just in the one that's been announced the last few weeks. And it would be nice to have some more in the planetary and Europe and sciences area. Next slide. So that's just a quick guide to what is available at the moment. It isn't quite as much as we've had in the past, but there will be more opportunities in the next round of the Horizon Europe programs. And there are some other programs coming up. There are also national programs, which I know some people have been passing notes around and so on in the last month or so about fellowship opportunities in different countries. We will keep our eyes open, and we will keep updating calls as they come out. And we will continue to give news to people when some of those larger bids come forward, and we look for people to join the consortium. And I've already seen in the chat at least one person saying they'd be happy to do that. So I will stop there, and I will leave it open to any questions or comments that you have.
We do have one question in the Q&A from Luca asking, is a spacecraft platform considered a research infrastructure?
Do you mean building a satellite? How do you define a spacecraft platform, Luca? You may want to come on. I'm sure you can be allowed to
promote Luca to panelists so that Luca can come on and speak. Luca, you
can take down the share slides as well. Hi, Luca. Don't see him.
In the meantime, Callum, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, so there's a couple of comments that people have made in the chat. One from Akosh, just to say that, as he very rightly points out, these calls are mainly for consortia. So if you're looking for options of partners, then Akosh and his team are there, and would be very interested in talking about submissions. I'm just setting up a thread on or a channel on Discord as well under the General Society ones, where potentially people can start some discussions.
Luca's coming.
There we go.
Luca,
can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, I needed to rejoin as a panelist. Yeah, no, my question was related to the possibility of, considering a spacecraft as a research infrastructure. So you are talking about this distributed research infrastructure. I was wondering whether a constellation of small sat could be a distributed research infrastructure in a general term, or whether the research infrastructures are really something which has to be on Earth, fixed places on Earth.
Somebody said the other day that one of the reasons it would be really fun if we had a lunar research infrastructure, because that would be the first extraterrestrial research infrastructure, right. Which I quite like the idea of saying that this is the research infrastructure that's not on Earth. Right. I don't. The answer to that is that a satellite constellation is a research infrastructure. I don't know, because you've got to buy time. How do you describe that? I don't know. The Commission don't know these things either. The research infrastructures they see as several things. So you've got the really big laboratories, which can be single standalone, like CERN. You've got collaborations like a group of all the European synchrotrons together. You've got the European EALI, the European light infrastructures. These are the the big laser labs that they've built currently in Prague, now in Szeged in Hungary, and one being developed in Romania. But the vast majority of the research infrastructures that have been built up over the 20 years are kind of Europlanet-like. They're laboratories, institutes, opening their labs, and online tools, of course, to the wider community. The definition of distributed infrastructures and how they work is a big debate. ESRI are doing a review at the moment, and I'm hoping that in next year, when Hungary has the presidency, that we can lean, because of our contacts, we can lean on the Hungarians to make this the topic of of that debate about what are infrastructures, how do you define them, and how they work. And as I say, I quite like the idea of having a lunar one, being extraterrestrial. But seriously, I don't know is your answer to things like that. I don't think we know. We have the telescope network, the telescope networks, which are links of telescopes on the Earth working together to do observations. That's been a big success in the current Europlanet program. And also RadioNet and Opticon have been running networks of telescopes on the ground for many, many years. If you had a suite at some stage of satellites that were doing something independently, like a platform, then yeah, maybe that is a research infrastructure. If that constellation was working as in some way together, but I don't quite know what we'd have yet. But it's good.
I might take an opportunity to ask a very quick second question. So when you're talking about NATO project, is the research outcome openly available?
Yes,
or is it?
Yeah. The Science for Peace program, as they call it, which is a name that came at the end of the Cold War. NATO. I mean, some people probably have experience. I mean, my first conference I ever went to as a PhD student was a NATO-funded conference. It was a 2-week summer school. They've tended to focus on things like technologies. Chemical warfare was very popular after a while. They do now have the space. Yes, you publish is exactly the same. Everything else, it is open stuff. There is another sector which is behind closed doors. That's your Ministry of Defense stuff. But this particular program is aimed at engaging the academics and industry sector to answer some of the solutions and the challenges. And as I say, up until now, space hasn't really been on its area. I was actually funded as a postdoc in the States by the American Air Force, which I think quite a lot of people were in that period. But now I think there's a time to think about it. That's why I think the idea of having a workshop where we get together with NATO to find out what they are. As I said, I've listed some of the topics. I think my colleagues here in Kent, particularly on impact studies, trying to understand how to defend your satellite against impacts is exactly the same sort of things we do when we're trying to make our spacecraft to make sure that they don't get hit by dust when they're flying too close to a moon of Jupiter. So I think there are areas of technology that we could perhaps bring over. I don't probably need to tell anybody in the room, but the defence sector is not a poorly funded area.
Thanks, Nigel.
So I think it might be interesting to see it, but I think there are other areas. I think some of the machine learning tools that we're developing might be of interest. Some of the GMAP areas, I mean, other way around. You know, we took the stuff from people looking at the Earth to look at the planets. Maybe we can bring some of those tools back. So I say at the moment the discussion, and I mentioned it to a couple of the companies in the UK Space Week last week, and I think the idea of bidding for a workshop where we bring the NATO community together with our community to explore what can planetary science and the space community do, if you like, here as part of Space Command might be interesting, and it might open up new opportunities. The other areas, they might be a very good, they might be an area there. We have our facilities. We have our infrastructure, as Anita will say, we've built this infrastructure. There may well be labs there that would be of interest to some of this research. I'm thinking again, the Dusty lab in Aarhus, but some of the other spectroscopic labs and so on, and may well be of interest in that area. So that might be another area that we can look at. So I think the plan is to try and get a workshop sometime in 2024 to see if we can bring these communities together. Probably held in Prague.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you, Luca. We have 10 minutes or 9 minutes for questions. So if others would like to raise something or just generally have a comment or share some advice on their own experiences with funding programs, then Callum can, if you just put up your hand or drop something in the Q&A or the chat, then Callum can promote you to be participant and we can hear from you.
So just picking up a couple of things, we have been having on and off discussions about doing something in Africa. I think this is something that we need to move forward on. If there is anybody on this call who has some links to Africa or would like to be engaged in that, I think Barbara Cavalazzi was on this call, so she's still there. I think it would be really useful to know. We don't always know who's got some work going on there. If there are any initiatives in your country with Africa that we could bring in, that would be very, very useful. I think that's an area where, with the telescope community, we should be able to put something together. I think should be very useful. The other area I want to just go back to is, as I said, on the fellowships. I think we've had this discussion now for quite a few years, where we are still not putting in as many proposals as from what I would call the planetary science side compared to our other colleagues. There's a lot of bids that go in exoplanet work, and I know some of us overlap with exoplanet work, so you can say whether that's there. But in other areas, we haven't had that many applications, and that's a missed opportunity. We do have this career mentoring scheme. Maybe Anita can just say something about it, because I think that's one of the things that career mentoring could do. It could help those people who are thinking about doing this to actually get a chance to talk to people who have been successful, but also give them be a critical friend for those bids. So Anita, you might want to say something about that, because I certainly think with 500 odd EPIC people, we should be looking at a dozen proposals per call.
Yeah, absolutely. Adita, I think might have been on the call earlier, but has left. Yeah, the team at Vilnius have been running the mentoring program for Europlanet. We've matched around 70 early career researchers with more senior researchers, and as Nigel says, there's been all kinds of outcomes that have come out of these, including some support in terms of advice on what kind of proposals people can put forward on the proposals themselves. I mean, I would just say that you can't expect your mentor to write your proposal for you or necessarily review your proposal for you. That's kind of beyond the scope of the project itself. But we do more generally within Europlanet, and just generally within the regional hubs, within the structures, within the board. We should be, as Nigel says, supporting the community in looking for these opportunities, in bringing more funding, bringing more expertise into the community. We can organise informal sessions. We have weekly get-togethers on Discord now at 12:30 CET every Friday. If you have things that you want to address, if you want to, you can let us know. We can potentially get people like Nigel there on that call, or others that have that kind of experience, and just during that session we can workshop and we can give advice and support. So there's lots of different ways that we can support you through the mentoring, just generally through Discord. I've set up, as I said, a channel on Discord about funding and proposals, so that's another place where you can put information. There's a couple of Q&As. Michael, yes, there is a way to get presentation slides. We'll put those onto the into the membership website. You can flip through them in a flipbook, and you can also download them. Nigel, you spoke about a European Lunar Institute. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I wish I could. I'm going to try and find out the people who talked about it over the summer, where it's gone, because I'd like to know too. and I'll be chasing it up in the next. Now we just finished a lot of work we've been doing over the last couple of weeks to find out what they're talking about. It was interesting that James Carpenter, who's now taken over again the Human and Space Resources program and been involved in that at ESA, mentioned the word "to" last week. So I think there is some feeling that there's something like that now that Europe is committed to the Artemis and the Return to the Moon program, of having some structure for people related to European research labs interested in the moon, seems to be talked about. Although I don't want it to be a rival of Europlanet, maybe we can join it. Or they can join us. Maybe the second, they should join us. It's interesting because we haven't Europlanet has kind of kept a little away from the lunar community. They have their own kind of things, but I think I think now probably we need to embrace each other. I think the general European view on Horizon programs in the future is to make people work together. So this is why we've set up this network of networks with other research infrastructures. Because, as I say, if we're going to have future programs, are almost certainly going to be collaborative. And I think the lunar community and the exoplanet community, they will need to be working with us. We all need to work together. I think that's fairly apparent. But we will go to Brussels and talk to them at some stage.
The other communities to engage in, and that's a real lesson from the last week, is these clusters, these industry clusters. That there was a lot of interest and a lot of potential contacts that we can develop through those. I think we're really going to try and focus on getting as many of those regional clusters, industry clusters, to come and spend some time with us at EPSC, within the exhibition, and potentially within industry sessions. But in terms of actually understanding who's out there, what kind of expertise there is, that seems to be a really great way of engaging with the community.
And many of our students are ending up, our graduate students are going into these jobs. So there's a lot of good contacts that we can get from people. I have quite a few of my students. I saw one walk up to me at the conference, reminded me. My course was enlightening, he said. That's why he decided to stay in the space industry. What more can I want? Well, maybe he can give me 10% of his salary when he's a millionaire.
Right. We have a couple of minutes left before we finish the hour. So if anybody has a final comment or final question, then please let us know. As I say, we will definitely make sure that the slides are shared on the membership website. We'll add a link to that as well in the newsletter when we send that around, so that you can see where to find it if you're not quite sure. We'll also be sending out details of the next webinars as soon as possible. And as Callum says, I think one of the things that we're really keen to do is to have one focused on early careers and recruitment for early careers, just to share some of those kind of ideas and expertise on what kind of job opportunities there may be out there. So that's something for the new year. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Nigel, for putting together another really great and helpful presentation. And we hope to have more discussion on Discord. We hope to have, please come on Fridays for our get-togethers too. And if there is anything you would like to be raised in these webinars, or more generally, then please do let us know. We're always open to ideas.
Indeed.
So, great, right. Have a great day. Have a nice lunch for those of you that haven't yet. And we look forward to seeing you next month. So thank you very much. And thanks again, Nigel.
No problem. Bye, everyone. Speak to you soon.